Kit Carson, Part 10. We now separated again. Mr. Talbot took charge of the camp with a man named Walker as his guide. He was ordered to strike for Mary's River and follow it down to where it is lost in the basin. Meanwhile, Fremont, with 15 men, was to pass south of Mary's River, and both parties were to meet at the lake made by Carson River. We passed over a fine country, abounding in wood, grass, and water, having only about 40 miles to travel without water before reaching the lake. We at length arrived and awaited the coming of Talbot. In 2 or 3 days his party came in. Here we again separated, Talbot and Walker to go through a pass to our south and cross the Sierra Nevadas to the waters of the San Joaquin. Meanwhile, we went up the Carson River, and having crossed the Sierra Nevada, arrived safely at Sutter's Fort. Captain Sutter was happy to see us and furnished us with everything we wanted. We remained at the fort a few days, purchasing about 40 head of cattle and a few horses, and then started to find our camp. We went up the San Joaquin Valley, crossed it where it comes out of the mountain, and then on to Kings River and up it to its headwaters. During our march, our cattle had become very tender-footed from traveling over the snow and rocks. From the head of Kings River, we started back for the prairie, but when we arrived, we had no cattle left, as they had all given out, and we had to leave behind all except those we killed for meat. As we were leaving the mountains, some Indians crawled into our camp during the night and killed 2 of our mules. Next morning, we started back for the fort. Through some mistake, we'd not found our camp, and as we had lost nearly all of our animals, it became necessary to return. The same evening, we came upon a party of Indians. We killed 5 of them and continued on to the fort. All of us were afoot, having lived principally on meat of wild horses that we had killed on the march. We now started for San Jose, where we remained only a few days to recruit. We procured a few animals there and crossed the coast range to see if we could hear anything of our party under Talbot. At San Jose, we heard that they were on the San Joaquin, and Fremont sent me with 2 men to meet them. We found them and guided them to San Jose. After we had all got together again, we started for Monterey to procure an outfit. When we were about 30 miles from Monterey, Fremont received a very impertinent order from General Castro, commanding him to leave the country immediately and saying that if he did not do so, he would be driven out. We packed up at dark and moved back about 10 miles to a little mountain, where we found a good place and made camp. General Castro followed us with several hundred men and established his headquarters near us. He would fire his big guns frequently to scare us, thinking by such demonstrations he could make us leave. We had about 40 men in our party armed with rifles, while Castro had several hundred soldiers, artillery, cavalry, and infantry. Fremont had received expresses from the Americans in Monterey advising him to leave as the Mexicans were strong and would surely attack us. He replied that he had done nothing to anger the Mexican commander, that he was performing a duty, and regardless of the consequences, he would not retreat. We remained in our position on the mountain for 3 days and became tired of waiting for the attack of the valiant Mexican general. We then started for the Sacramento River and ascended it to Peter Lawson's, where Fremont intended to obtain his outfit for the homeward trip. We remained here 10 days, and during our stay, some Americans who were settled nearby came in with a report that there were about 1,000 Indians in the vicinity making preparations to attack the settlements, and requested assistance of Fremont to drive them back. He started for the Indian camp with his party and some few Americans nearby. We found them to be in great force, and as had been stated, we attacked them, and although I do not know how many we killed, it was perfect butchery. The survivors fled in all directions, and we returned to Lawson's having accomplished our purpose and given the Indians such a chastisement that it'd be a long time before they would again think of attacking settlements. We received the best of treatment at Lawson's and finished our outfit. And then we set out for the Columbia River, going up the Sacramento and passing near the Shasta Butte. We traveled on without any molestation till we reached the upper end of Klamath Lake. A few days after we left, information was received in California that war had begun between the United States and Mexico, and Lieutenant Gillespie of the U.S. Marines and 6 men were sent after us to have us come back. After he had traveled about 300 miles, his animals began to give out, and he had but poor hopes of overtaking us. He then concluded to mount 2 men on his best animals and send them on in advance. These men caught up with us on the lake and gave the communications they bore to Fremont. Having put poor faith in the goodwill of the Klamath Indians and fearing for the safety of Lieutenant Gillespie's party, Fremont concluded to go and meet him. He took 10 picked men and traveled 60 miles and came upon him in camp for the night. He sat up till 12 or 1 o'clock reading the letters which he had received from the States. Owens and myself were lying near the fire, rolled in our saddle blankets, the night being cold. Shortly after Fremont lay down, I heard a noise like the stroke of an axe. Jumping up, I saw that there were Indians in camp and gave the alarm. They'd already tomahawked 2 men, Basil Lachinese and a Delaware, and were advancing to the fire, where 4 Delawares were sleeping. They heard the alarm in time, and one of them, named Crane, got up and seized a gun. Unfortunately, it was not his own gun and wasn't loaded. He did not know this and kept standing erect trying to fire. He fell with 5 arrows in his breast, 4 of the wounds proving mortal. The evening before, I had fired off my gun for the purpose of cleaning it. In doing so, I had accidentally broken the tube and now had nothing but my pistol. I rushed upon the leader and fired, cutting the string that held his tomahawk. Having no other weapon, I was now compelled to retire. Maxwell next fired on him, hitting him in the leg as he was turning around. Step fired. The ball struck him in the back, passing near the heart, and he fell. The balance of his party then ran. He was the bravest Indian I ever saw. If his men had been as brave as himself, we surely would all have been killed. We did have 3 men killed and 1 slightly wounded. If we'd not gone to meet Gillespie, he and his party would have been murdered, and the Indians were evidently on his trail for that purpose. End of Part 10.